Welcome to Lyme Time. I'm Allie from the Tick Chicks. We are all more than Lyme disease and chronic illness, and together we stand with you to overcome and rise. I'll bring you closer to the experts in cutting-edge treatments and even a few unexpected ways of healing. I'll ask the questions you want answers to regarding Lyme disease and successful ways of getting you closer to 100%. We are in this together and will not be defined by Lyme. Dr. Bill Rawls is a licensed physician with over 30 years of experience and a leading expert in Lyme disease, holistic health, and herbal medicine. In the middle of his successful medical career, Dr. Rawls' life was interrupted by Lyme disease. In his journey to overcome it, he explored a wide range of treatments, from conventional medicine to an array of alternative therapies. In the decades since his recovery, Dr. Rawls has helped thousands of patients recover from chronic illness and maintain wellness. He is the author of the best-selling book, Unlocking Lyme, and his newest book is the Cellular Wellness Solution. Dr. Rawls is the medical director of rawlsmd.com and Vital Plan, an online holistic health company and certified B Corporation. Welcome, Dr. Rawls.
Oh, thank you. It is a pleasure.
Boy, am I excited about this interview, as I know my listeners are. And as you know, I am one of your biggest fans of Unlocking Lyme. I have it handy. I refer to it all the time. I give it to friends. I give it to anybody and recommend it to anybody who's newly diagnosed with Lyme disease. But this book, and I'm going to hold it up for the people on YouTube, I want you to see how big this thing is. And again, like Unlocking Lyme, it is very easy to read. I don't feel like I'm reading medical journals in terms of experiments and scientific terminology that I can't relate to. This is actually one of the best comprehensive books that I can talk about, and I'm thrilled. I got an advanced copy. I read it furiously, and I actually put so many sticky notes in it because not only do I want to refer back to practical steps and very specific things for very specific symptoms, but I have a couple bookmarked for my husband as well, because he's on the Cliff Note version, if you know what I mean. And I think that between the men's health issues and the hormonal issues from both men and women, which we'll get into in just a second, it just couldn't have been written better. And I'm just so excited to talk to you about it. For everybody listening, the reference pages alone in the back of the book are nearly 100 pages. I mean, Dr. Rawls really put his heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears into this book, and I hope that you rush out to get a copy. But let's talk a little bit about it. You already had a great selling book, Unlocking Lyme, and you know, it's such an undertaking. It's the better part of, I'm sure, years in the making to write a second book. What compelled you to write the second book?
It was the burden of knowledge of having all this information. So chronic Lyme disease put me in a different space of how I understood chronic illness in general and how I looked at solutions. So it wasn't throwing all my conventional training out the window. It was reshuffling it to get a new perspective on how we should be looking at things and looking at things that don't work in our conventional medical system, how we manage chronic illnesses and the different shortfalls that we have there, how they left me without solutions. And years of looking and recognizing that if you truly understand what chronic Lyme disease is, you're looking for a model of all of chronic illness, that foundational information, the microbe part, all of it, and it's not the same for every person. Different illnesses I'm not suggesting that everybody that all chronic illnesses are caused by the bacteria of Lyme disease, But I am suggesting that there is a micro connection to most, possibly all chronic illnesses, and many, possibly most cancers. So that's just something not to ignore. And once you really understand that, you also understand that our conventional pharmaceutical therapies are truly not adequate to solve this problem. So that all, just having that knowledge and feeling just a need to pass that along to everyone else during my time was really important. So this was a 3-year project. It took me 2 years to write and research the book, and another year just to pare it down to make it such that it was palatable to everyone.
You certainly did a great job in doing that. It's very easy to read, and there are so many parts of the book that are useful. Like I referred to that it should be on everyone's shelf for sure. So going back to understanding cellular wellness and understanding that that could actually be the ultimate root cause of disease, especially in this country, for several reasons, I'm sure. Can you help us understand on a basic level why cellular health is a root cause for disease?
Yeah, it gets back to the fundamentals, and I think we tend to miss some of those things. In my conventional training, we learned about cells, and we learned about histology and how cells make up tissues, but it didn't really translate into therapy and how our true understanding of chronic illness. But what it boils down to is that we are made of these functional units called cells. And that makes us very different than like a car. So a car, a cell phone, those are units made of parts. And one of the parts breaks, that thing is done until you fix it or replace the parts. So that's very different. Sometimes we use a car as an analogy of fixing us. And it works on a certain level. But when you get right down to it, we are made, our smallest functional unit is a cell, which is microscopic. You can't see it with the naked eye. It's so small. So our body is a collection of trillions and trillions of cells. And we have about 200 plus different kinds of cells in the body. So absolutely everything that happens in the body is a function of cells. So your health is directly related to the health of your cells. But it's really pretty cool thing when you think about it. It's like when you get past thinking of the heart as a unit, it's a composite made up of these individual units that are replaceable. Our heart beats our whole lifetime. It never stops. But we're losing cells all the time. So cells get damaged, we can lose cells, heart keeps right on working because it's not like a single unit, it's this composite of all these billions and billions of cells. And really the coolest thing about cells is cells can take care of themselves, cells can repair themselves, cells can regenerate into new cells. And so it gives us an extreme resilience that outpaces any man-made device, which is really, really cool. But when you look at that spectrum between wellness and illness, cells have to be in the center of it. You're only as healthy as the health of your cells. So if your cells are unhealthy, then you're going to be unhealthy. And you can actually define symptoms as stressed cells. When you step on your ankle wrong, you've injured cells in your ankle. And those cells release substances that activate nerves that tell the brain something is going on that's wrong. So we feel it as pain, but you also lose that function. So when cells are stressed, they can't do their jobs that they're working. So whether that's a collection of heart cells that have been damaged in a heart attack, or brain cells, or muscle injury, It's all about cells. All injury, all illness can be traced to the cells in the body. And the types of cells that are stressed define the symptoms.
So would you say there's a certain tipping point, so to speak? So in other words, a cancer cell might have a tipping point that it's just been stressed for too long, and it may or may not come back to optimum health.
Yes, I think that's one nice thing is that we can lose cells. And and all cells in the body. So cells can repair themselves. So what healing is the ability of cells to repair internal damage and regenerate. So all cells have that capacity, and that collective capacity is what healing is all about, but it's not unlimited. So you hear about mitochondria. So all cells have mitochondria that provide energy. So what happens over time is cells gradually burn out their mitochondria and they lose their energy. So the more you stress your cells, the faster they're going to run out of energy. But we have a lot of extra cells. So you hit peak cell count at age 20. And at that point, you have 5 to 10 times the number of cells in your body that you need to function. And through the rest of your life, by attrition, you'll gradually lose cells. So how fast you lose cells defines your lifespan. So if you're stressing your cells a lot, then they're going to use more energy. And so stress cells have to work harder. So they use more energy. They burn out their mitochondria faster. And so you run out of cells faster. It's kind of like an hourglass filled with cells. And when all your cells run out, when you lose a critical mass of functional cells, especially in chief organs like your heart or your lung or your brain, that's when things are done. So taking care of our cells is critical, not only for staying well, but also for enhancing our longevity.
It's interesting because many people associate physical health, I guess you could call it, on the outside as the example that we should all lead. But we do run up against these people that are triathletes or in optimum health and shape and physical conditions that still succumb to bad cellular health. So it's not even just a matter of being in tip-top shape physically. It's also maintaining that cellular wellness that might not even have to do with exercise so much. It has to do with, again, the broad spectrum that you cover in your book. And you really have to be firing on all levels, I guess, at the same time to kind of combat your genetic dispositions.
Yeah. Cellular health is important at every level, and there are different cell stresses. But when you start looking at any kind of illness or symptom from the point of view of cellular stress, then you really start defining things differently than we do in conventional medicine. So in conventional medicine, we basically we look at a problem from the point of view of how do we suppress the symptoms or suppress the manifestations of illness. And we're doing that artificially with drugs. And drugs, the big thing is drugs have very little capacity to reduce cellular stress. They're basically artificially blocking the symptoms that are happening or how the brain perceives those symptoms. So things like fatigue, which is a sign of just general cellular stress throughout the body, there aren't any drugs for that because the drugs don't reduce cellular stress. So another way of looking at illness is it's like if you sprain your ankle and you start using crutches and put a brace on it, you take the stress off of it, it will heal. The cells will heal. If you keep walking on it, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, to the point that you do injure those cells beyond recovery, and you lose that function. So reducing cellular stress allows the cells of the body to heal. So what are the stresses? Really 5 categories of things that I outline in the book. Food, what you eat, how you're nourishing yourselves, toxic substances that you're exposed to, and we're getting exposed to a lot of stuff in our world now. Chronic mental stress, what that does is it disrupts communication. So when we talk about hormones and neurotransmitters and nerve pathways, what we're talking about is cellular communication. For cells to work together as a unit that we define as the body, cells have to be communicating with each other all the time. And so our brain is constantly sensing what's going on outside the body and changing what's happening inside with our cellular dynamics to match those conditions. So when we are chronically stressed and we're pushing that envelope, that we're staying in that alert mode, our cells don't have downtime to recover and everything starts breaking down. And then if you don't sleep, sleep is when your cells recover from the day of stress. So that's important. Sleep is essential. So that's a category. Fourth category is physical factors. So here we're talking about that balance, that if you're sedentary, you're not moving blood and your cells aren't getting the nutrients and oxygen they need, and pulling away toxins from cells. So the most important thing with exercise is promoting blood flow that helps cells get what they need. But there are extremes of that. So when we talk about extreme athletes, a little stress is good for us. So if we're physically stressing our cells, then we're optimizing our systems for cellular recovery. But if you push that too hard, there's a fine line. And many athletes cross over this line, especially as they age, that they are overtaxing their cells. There's too much physical stress and cells start breaking down. And when that happens, you start getting inflammation, the immune system breaks down, and then you set yourself up for the last category, which is microbes. And this audience knows all about the microbes that we associated with Lyme disease. But I make a case in the book that is supported by growing evidence that pretty much everything that we pick up in our lifetime, from the time we are babies and start putting stuff in our mouths, we pick up a lot of things, and those things end up dormant in our tissues for a lifetime. And you stress your cells with bad food, chronic stress, toxic environment, too much or too little exercise, and your cells become vulnerable to invasion by these microbes. And that is the connection to all of these kinds of chronic illnesses. So when you don't take care of your cells, whether that's overtaxing your cells physically or other kinds of stress factors, or often a combination of all of the above, then you allow your cells to be vulnerable to the microbes. And that's where the connections to other chronic illness start becoming apparent.
Well said. We learn first about cellular health, cellular wellness, and the root causes of all these diseases, and then we go into different herbs. Your passion started with medicine, and it's now shifted into herbs and herbal protocols. I love the comprehensive guide in your book, probably one of the most detailed in terms of good, bad, and maybe not list of herbs. And for everybody watching, it's very, very detailed. It goes in alphabetical order, and it's extremely useful. And it's a great handy reference book for that alone. So how do herbs differ from antibiotics for bacterial infections?
Yeah, it's we'll talk about that and maybe how just herbs are different from drugs in general. Um, so, you know, I really didn't have much experience with herbs for, I'd say, the first 20 years of my career. But I wasn't opposed to people using herbs. I had a lot of people in my practice that were taking herbal therapy, but you get biased opinions. So my opinion was, well, herbs are just weak versions of drugs. They don't have the capacity to do what we can do with drug therapies. Um, and my personal experience just totally changed that and made me realize that it wasn't a fair comparison. It's apples and oranges. Herbs and drugs are two very, very different things that intersect at some point, and we'll talk about that. But we're really talking about two different things with two different potentials to help us. And when you start recognizing that, then you start looking at a scenario where we could use these things concomitantly to get a greater benefit. So with an antibiotic, what you're getting is a single chemical agent. And most people don't realize that all antibiotics originally were sourced for some natural source, either a bacteria, a fungus, or a plant. But the difference is what scientists do is they pull a single chemical out of that affects a bacteria or a virus or a protozoa in a very specific way. It blocks cell wall formation or in some way affects replication of that entity. But it's just a single chemical agent. And then they take that agent and they use chemical means to potentiate it and then mass produce it in some other way. So antibiotics are very potent, but antibiotics are pretty much indiscriminate. You take an antibiotic and it kills all the bacteria in your gut. That can be valuable. So if you've got an invasion of extracellular bacteria that are invaded your system, they're in your bloodstream or in your tissues, and they're exposed, they're outside cells, then antibiotics are a great solution. In other words, something like a pneumococcal pneumonia, antibiotics can knock that thing down in a very short period of time. Or tick bite that you pick up, Rickettsia or Borrelia, Rickettsia associated with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. While those microbes are coursing through the bloodstream, antibiotics can be very useful for knocking their numbers down. Do antibiotics eliminate those microbes completely? I don't think so, even in people that aren't symptomatic, ever. I don't think it happens. Herbs, we're talking about something completely different. So when you look at an herb, what you're getting is a wide spectrum of chemical compounds that have been called phytochemicals. So what the phytochemicals are doing is serving the plant. The plant generates these substances to protect its cells very specifically. It generates these substances to protect its cells from free radical damage, toxic substances, radiation, and microbes of every variety. So it's not a chemical, it's a spectrum of hundreds and hundreds of chemicals that are designed to take care of a wide spectrum of different, basically hit that threat from different angles and protect cells from a wide variety. So it's basically a cell protection system. Kind of like our immune system, except plants don't have a cellular immune system like we do. The way plants evolve, they use chemistry to solve problems. So it's a biochemical defense system that is used specifically to protect cells. So it's not one chemical, it's hundreds of chemicals. And you can think of this as a system that has a certain intelligence about it. And I think that's really, really important when you're looking at what herbs do. So when we're using an antimicrobial herb like Japanese knotweed or cat's claw or garlic, we're getting the plant's entire system. Something that I recognized early on. So when I was in my struggle, every time I used antibiotics, it would just tear my gut apart very quickly. By default, I started using herbs. I started getting better, but my gut got better too. Interesting. And, it really became apparent that the herbs were actually balancing the gut and microbiome, not disrupting it. And that became apparent not only from my experience, but working with hundreds and now even thousands of people. Same experience. Well, when I was writing this book, I actually found that someone actually took the time, a group of researchers looked at an animal model and actually proved that phytochemicals from many type of herbs, this total plant chemistry coming from herbs, actually balance the gut microbiome, and it can suppress pathogens but allow normal flora to flourish. That makes sense if you think about it, because the plant doesn't want to kill its normal flora, just like our immune system doesn't kill our normal flora, but it definitely wants to suppress pathogens. So we have a lot of commonality with plants and other kinds of things. So so I think that's the limitation with an antibiotic. So when they pull it from that natural source, they didn't pull the whole system. They just pulled the thing that they thought was the most potent. And again, for a lot of indications, we need antibiotics, but our overuse of antibiotics has put us in real trouble with bacterial resistant agents. There are a lot of bacteria, viruses, et cetera, that pretty quickly become resistant to antibiotics. Because herbs are a system using hundreds and hundreds of phytochemicals against a wide spectrum of different microbes, bacterial resistance with herbs is unknown. It is not thought to happen. So herbs may be our best hope in this world where more and more bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics. And the pharmaceutical companies, because antibiotics really don't have the profit margins of a lot of the drugs used in chronic illness, we're not investing. The pharmaceutical industry isn't investing in new antibiotics. They're basically using the same stuff, just reshuffling the same stuff that we were using and when I was in medical school 30 years ago. And that's not good.
I like the idea of one-stop shopping in terms of just getting multiple benefits from a single herb and multiple systemic benefits on that level, and healing multiple organs or systems within your body just from taking one herb. And then if you take combinations of certain herbs like you do for your Lyme protocol and vital plan, which is called the recovery, advanced recovery. I have those here too.
Yeah.
But that program, these programs are very hopeful. It just fills me with hope to know that there are so many benefits from herbs, not just what you think you might be treating, but they might help you out in other areas that you're not even sure of that are breaking down in your body.
The key is that this thing, when you take the concept of wellness and illness down to the cellular level and look at what herbs are doing compared to what drugs are doing, the herbs are protecting our cells from microbes, from free radicals, from all of these different entities. And therefore, it's a cell protection system that enhances anything else that we're doing. So when stress is reduced, cells have the opportunity to recover from being stressed. So that's what healing is. So there really aren't any drugs that I'm aware of, other than possibly antibiotics at some level, that can promote healing, promotes true healing at the cellular level. That's exactly what herbs are doing. By reducing cellular stress, herbs are allowing cells to recover. So herbs promote healing where drugs don't.
And no, they take away from it a lot of times. I mean, they might cure one area or help your body cure it in one area, but you're right, that gut takes a beating.
Yep. And herbs are affecting every cell in the body too. So, that was something that was really puzzling to me. I would read about these herbs. We're used to drugs being very, very specific. And I would read about a drug like hawthorn, which is beneficial to the heart, but then it was used for gut issues, and it has some issue. It helps arthritis. And it's like, come on, how does that work? But then you take it down to the cellular level and realize that the phytochemistries of these herbs, they're not protecting one cell, they're protecting all the cells in the body. And then you start to understand, well, yeah, that's why they were using it. But this idea that herbs are weak versions of drugs. So a lot of drugs come from plants, but it's not the things that have been traditionally used for herbal therapy. It's plants we would define as poisons. And so some herbs were used in traditional herbalism, low dose, therapeutically dosed poisons, but not very often. So that's basically what a lot of our drugs are doing, is they're poisoning enzymes or affecting specific pathways that block some of the manifestations of disease, symptoms, progression, that sort of thing. But they are not affecting cellular health. So people end up in a state of managed illness. Whereas with the herbs, we're promoting cellular health, but that takes time. So it's not that they're weak versions of the drugs, it's that healing takes time. So you have to take the herbs for a long time. It's a commitment. Yeah. And so that's a big difference between the two.
But it's a small price to pay. I mean, I know it's to those that are suffering and think, oh, I want that quick fix today. It's better to take your time and to understand. It might take, with herbs, it may take a few weeks to really get fully integrated into your system and move things along. So it's a slower process sometimes. However, it's kinder on the body. And I like in the part in your book, there's a section that offers specific protocols, I'll call them, not only herbal, that address andropause, menopause, blood sugar control, brain and bone health, cardio health, gastrointestinal health, joint health, prostate health, skin and sleep health. And this is where I put my little bookmarkers in there, because as you know, we're always dealing with something from time to time as human beings on this planet. And I'd like to refer back to that from time to time. But can you talk a little bit about what I found interesting for me are herbs for hormone differences for men and women, and how could an herb actually affect hormones?
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, that's another aspect of the phytochemistry of herbs. So we're getting the protective side of the plant, but plants are also, their cells have to talk to one another too. They have to communicate. There's cellular communication. You have this unit, a tree, a shrub, whatever, it's a multicellular unit. And to function as a unit, those cells have to communicate. So nature uses a lot of similar things. So plants are using many of the same chemical messengers, hormones, signaling agents of various kinds that we are. So if you take a healthy plant and we're taking that herb, a lot of times those signaling agents that are part of that phytochemistry have a balancing effect on our chemistry. So let's take an herb like ashwagandha. That's an herb from Africa. It's also used up through India. It's become a very popular herb that we define as an adaptogen. So an adaptogen is an herb that helps you become stress resistant. So how does that thing do that? So, well, it gets back to that cellular model again. So our brain is constantly sensing everything that's going on outside of our body. And it is using the base of the brain, the hypothalamus, which is a little walnut-sized appendage right at the base of the brain, so that it sends its messages through the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is kind of it's our thermostat, right? So it's constantly sensing pressure and temperature and hunger and all the things that are going on inside the functions of the body. And it's listening to our cognitive brain. And it works through the pituitary, which also works down through our thyroid, our adrenals, and our reproductive hormones, our ovaries or testes. So all of those things are being regulated by the hypothalamus. So if your brain senses a problem, so you're going about your day and you had an argument with your boss and you've got deadlines and you've got the kids to pick up, your brain senses that you're in peril, that you're having an emergency, and that's ongoing. So it tells the hypothalamus, shift all the resources in the body to high alert, gear up all the cells in the body for maximum pressure because, there's a storm coming. So we put a lot of resources like digesting food on hold to take care of that threat that's the equivalent of like running from a tiger, but it's going on continuously. It doesn't stop. So that gears us up. It raises our cortisol. It heightens our thyroid functions. It disrupts our hormone supply to our ovaries and our testes. And it throws everything off balance if it's just like that from day to day to day and we're not getting enough sleep. So ashwagandha has hormones that are kind of similar. So all this feedback is coming from the body that it's in high alert. So we're getting these calming chemicals that basically feed back to the hypothalamus and say, nah, it's not quite so bad. Just calm down a little bit. So that chemical feedback to the hypothalamus feeds down to the thyroid. So it's really good for normalizing thyroid function, adrenal function, and our reproductive function. So it's basically counteracting some of those really crazy messages we're getting and just restoring balance. So a lot of herbs do that. All of our adaptogens have those properties. And some, every plant, your different plants have different environments that they have. There's their natural environment and just different stresses. So some plants are maybe a little better because they solve problems with chemistry a little bit differently than another herb. So some herbs are a little better for certain kinds of stress than others. It's like rhodiola is really good for physical stress factors, working late hours, having to work physical stresses. Ashwagandha, great for mental stresses. You can combine them and get even better responses. So when you look at what the phytochemistry of the herbs is doing and how that's affecting cells in our body, wow, that's really cool.
It's so cool. And so, the more I talk to you, and every time I talk to you, it just reiterates the miracle of the body and the intelligence of plants. Yeah. And there's a lot to be said. You really have to open your mind and understand that these plants are also surviving, and they've each developed their own intelligence about how to survive, how to signal each other if danger's in the area, how to flourish in certain crazy climates and things like that. It's just largely misunderstood, I think. And it just always brings me back to, how well you talk about it and how these things can help us. And how can they potentially stave off things like cancer, MS, Alzheimer's, dementia? Is that all going back to the same cellular stress?
It is truly, it's when you start looking at the microbe cancer connection, wow, it's scary and it's just not something that we should overlook. Right now, 20% of cancers have been directly linked to microbes. I think it's much higher, possibly even all of them. But, you look at things like Borrelia with Lyme disease. There was a study that found Borrelia microbes in cancer specimens. They found Bartonella in breast cancer specimens. I found a study where they had found that many different types of tumor have a tumor microbiome of all these weird microbes living inside the cells. And then there was a study that they were able to use these intracellular microbes, the kind of microbes that we find in Lyme disease and all of these other connections, and they were able to induce cancers in an organism with cells like ours. And, so that in the book, so you look at all those microbe connections and how, what the microbes want from us, you really can't ignore it. And so there's another concept out there that I touched on in the book that's part of cellular wellness called autophagy. So autophagy is the ability of cells. It's really part of the healing process. It's a fundamental cellular thing that we would define it as cellular housekeeping. So cells have the ability to take worn out proteins, worn out parts, recycle them. So it basically puts them into a vacuole, like throw them into a washing machine and process them and break them down to the basic organic molecules, and then reuse those molecules again. So it's the ultimate in cellular recycling. And all cells do this. So autophagy is really, really important for cellular health. The interesting thing is that it is also the mechanism by which cells have the ability to destroy or break or expel microbes, bacteria, viruses, protozoa that have entered the cell. In other words, it's not just the immune system. Your cells can defend themselves. By this process of autophagy, cells can eject microbes. Wow, that is really important. So what happens when we get chronic Lyme disease is our cells are stressed throughout our body and our cells are vulnerable. And autophagy is impaired so that our cells can't resist being invaded by the microbes. So again, it's not just the immune system. You got to keep your cells healthy. So in the book, I was able to pull studies that showed that the phytochemistry of herbs was a huge factor in preserving autophagy. So every angle you look at the herbal phytochemistry, wow, it has power. It suppresses these intracellular microbes that are invading our body. It preserves autophagy. It's reducing all of the different stress factors that stress our cells. So longevity, not getting cancer, not getting chronic illness, it's about keeping your cells healthy. So we can't live forever. We all run out of cells at some point. When is that marker? What is that date? So it's speculated that if there was no stress, zero stress, our cells were never stressed, we have the capacity to last 120 years before our cells run out. Of course, that's pretty hard. That's a tall order to say no stress for a whole lifetime. But the message is taking herbs gives you an edge. And then anything you do to improve your diet, exercise regularly, live in a clean environment, it's going to be enhanced exponentially. So you're not stressing your cells so they don't run out of energy. So you keep your cells longer. So the goal is this: why not live as long as you can, whether that's 80 or 90 or 100 or whatever, but not having symptoms? Because if you can keep your cells healthy, even though they're aging, if they're not stressed, you're not going to have symptoms. And that's what this book is all about.
It really is. It's a guidebook to helping those cells along and actually improving your health on a cellular level, not just muscular or blood or taking one system at a time. It's actually helping every cell in every part of your body. It's incredible. And your book goes in depth about a healing diet, detoxification, anti-stress, and exercise, which doctors will say and have said throughout the years, just try to eat healthy and get some exercise and all of that. And it seems like us modern day Americans sort of ignore that. We've been conditioned to want to do something else somehow, and that thinking that it can't possibly work. What do you actually attribute that thought process to? Because it's so damaging to people to ignore some of these simpler things in life.
Well, I think we all tend to do what's easier and what's more comfortable. It dates back to just how we're programmed, right? So for hundreds of thousands of years, humans ate a forage food diet that was really, really lean. It didn't have much calories. It had very little carbohydrate and fat in it. So our brain is programmed that, when a source of calories come along, you gorge on it because it might be gone tomorrow. There wasn't a refrigerator that you could keep it for a while. You come upon a salmon run or a bush full of berries, you eat every bit of it when you can. And so that tendency for gorging we have now in a world that is just saturated with calories wherever you look. So it takes some work, it takes some practice to counter those effects. And I'm still not perfect, but I've come a long way in my lifetime. So what I've tried to do in those different areas, whether it's food or stress or exercise, is leave people with practical guidelines that they can actually do, that are achievable, that can make a difference. Just simple things to shoot for. And are they going to get them right from the very beginning? Yeah, it takes time, takes some practice. But let's hit the high points. And what I have seen over the years is books on diet or books on stress, and they go through these just detailed and laborious protocols for how you need to do things. And people go on that plan for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, and they do it and they feel better. But it's so complicated. It's not something that they can just make part of their day. So it drops off, and then they're back to where they were. So what I want to leave people in this book is just the basics of, if you can do just shoot for these basic things, very easy to remember, that's going to put you in a good place.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Just in parting, talking about your actual protocol, what is the shelf life of a typical herbal supplement?
But long time in the different preparations, whether that's a tinctured or a powdered herb. I think most companies our company, we're putting about 2 years on it, but quite frankly, they last a lot longer than that. So herbal preparations are pretty good. They do have a pretty long shelf life, and definitely, It's easier. We do live in this commercial world. The interesting things is herbs have been around for thousands and thousands of years, but my perception is that they haven't been readily available. People were dependent on local knowledge of a shaman or someone who knew about the herbs and the availability of them, and they were only in season. So now we've got so much knowledge. There's just been an explosion in looking at the phytochemistry of herbs in the past decade. When I was looking at this 15 years ago, if I put in the word phytochemistry into PubMed, I'd get nothing. Wow. Now you get hundreds and hundreds of articles. People are really good scientists are really investigating these things. So we know so much more, and we've got just a wonderful herbal industry that has good sides and bad sides, like everything. But the book is it's a guide to help you navigate that, so you can get good products. But yeah, herbs are more consistently available now than ever before in the history of humans.
And practically speaking, I mean, it's probably the most optimum scenario to go out in your backyard and pick Japanese knotweed or cat's claw or whatever, and just steep it and sip it and get it straight from the source. But when you grind them up and dry them out and all of that, do our bodies actually incorporate it the same way as it would a fresh herb?
Surprisingly, yes. That's where the science comes in, is optimizing the phytochemistry and also optimizing absorption of these chemicals. So, what the science I'm seeing shows that it's pretty darn good. It would be lovely to have all the things that you need in your backyard and process them. But it's like, if you're just doing it fresh, you're getting some things, but you're only getting it when it's fresh. So it's hard to do consistently. If you do it as a tea, you're only getting certain chemicals. You're not getting the full spectrum of the plant. So alcohol, water tincture, you're getting a lot more, but then you're talking about, a process of soaking it in water and alcohol, and it gets pretty complicated. So again, living in a world where we do have excellent commercial products available just makes it so the average person can have these things. And the other thing is, you can't grow everything that you would want to have in one place. Some things come from the tropics. Some things come from northern climates. The company that's probably done the closest to that is Gaia Herbs here in North Carolina. They do grow a lot of their own things, but it's pretty limited, and they are still having to source a lot of things worldwide because it's really tough to get everything. And there's so much great stuff out there.
Yes, it's certainly accessible now, and we trust you. Yeah, I mean, you've done the homework. You've done it the right way in terms of, being a certified B corporation, which is a lot of things you have to jump through in order to get that certification. For those of you who don't know, it's certainly not something that you find for every herb that you're going to try and get on the internet. So Dr. Rawls really has it down pat. Are there any other thoughts that you might have that we didn't get to, or any last thoughts for our listeners today?
I think it's I recognize this is a Lyme audience, and I wrote Unlocking Lyme for that audience, for people who wanted to learn more about herbal therapy. And that's a guidebook for overcoming Lyme disease. This is not a guidebook for overcoming chronic illness. This is a guidebook for everybody. It's an introduction that any person should be interested in. It's an introduction to herbs, and it's an introduction to concepts that we all should be aware of. So it's not as much, it's not a sequel to Unlocking Lyme. But that being said, the new concepts, the new evidence, the new information about herbs, that information, I think, applies to anyone and should be very, very important to this audience. And then that problem solving part in the back, I think, a lot of people do have those issues with Lyme disease too, that, applications to looking at applying these concepts to those particular problem areas, I think are valuable too.
Yes, like I said, I've earmarked a few of these passages in here dealing with specific areas of the body because that does apply to everyone. It applies to everyone that doesn't have a chronic illness. It applies to prevention of chronic illness. It applies to children. It hopefully will apply to our parents out there who are raising small babies and children or pregnant and want a better life for their kids and set them up for a better future instead of having these breakdowns along the way that a lot of us did from a previous generations. So, this book is here to stay. Again, it's called The Cellular Wellness Solution. Tap into your full health potential with the science-backed power of herbs by Dr. Bill Rawls. I love the fact that you have a supportive system as you're reading through the book. You can tune into cellularwellness.com/extras. And that offers tools, charts, and other resources for everyone to print out as they go along. I love, one of the things that I love about this book is every once in a while, you'll come across a page that offers your own personal recommended reading tips and reading books along the way that help, in case somebody wants to know more about a specific issue. You offer those reading referrals, which I love. I love that. And this book can be found at Rawls MD, Vital Plan Select offers a few more herbal therapies like CBD. One of the best on the market, I can tell you that right off the bat. And also at the tickchicks.com and rawlsmd.com. We thank you for your time. I'm always I could talk to you for 2 hours, but I'm going to have everybody please do go to rawlsmd.com, because not only does he have all of his products and books and everything available there, but you have one of the greatest webinar series out there. He offers free webinars from time to time, and you can sometimes even type in your questions and answers and get those answered if you have a specific problem. So thank you, Dr. Rawls. I appreciate your time. I look forward to speaking with you again soon, and good luck on this book tour. I really am so glad.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Congratulations. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.